Great careers are not accidents, they're journeys built through clarity and intent. In every industry, there are such journeys that reveal true leadership, sacrifice, risk, and purpose. I'm Dirk, and this is The Pitch and the Catch, where we dive into choices, changes, and the careers they create. Welcome. Welcome. Today's guest has built a career where science meets strategy and real-world impact. Matteo Marano, a trained microbiologist, brings more than 2 decades of experience across biotech, diagnostics, and data-driven healthcare. He has led commercial growth and partnership strategies for organizations like Roche, Rosa & Co., and Certara. His work has connected innovative research to real-world solutions, helping scientists turn complex innovation into meaningful patient outcomes. Today, we'll explore what it takes to build and sustain a leadership career in an industry shaped by rapid scientific innovation, evolving patient needs, and the constant task of aligning discovery with business reality. So whether you're in biotech, pharma, or any realm where innovation meets execution, this conversation will give you a fresh look at how vision, collaboration, and execution turn science into progress. Welcome, Matteo. Thanks for joining us. We're excited to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I just, at one small correction, I'm actually a molecular biologist.
Oh,
if that's our biggest stress today, we're going to call it a victory.
No, see, maybe during the conversation we get to the difference between micro and molecular, because I think if you're not a biologist, you're both like, okay, what is the one, what is the other? So maybe we'll get there. And maybe my first question helps us. I'd love to begin the way we do with every guest, Matthias. I want to help listeners who are not deep into this content that you're in understand what you do and how you describe your work. So I would love to start very early. You started your career as a molecular or as a biologist and spent almost the first 10 years working in labs. What originally drew you to the world of cell theory, evolution, and petri dishes?
You know, I think when I was in high school, which is obviously when I started thinking about becoming a scientist, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I honestly don't think a lot of folks really know what they want to do when they're 15 and 16 years old. You know, for me, it was a lot of the question of what do I do well, and can I make a career out of that? And, you know, early on, I had a lot of success in my, high school applications of largely biological sciences. So remember, I won the science fair in my high school, and I came in second in the state way back in the mid 80s. Yeah, I'm that old. And I realized, maybe this is something that I'm fairly good at. You know, the world has certainly evolved a lot, and certainly the industry has evolved a lot since then. But it's been really a fascinating ride to see how things have evolved, where things have gone, and keeping the focus on being impactful. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've been focused on is keeping what I'm doing as impactful as I can, and redefining impact to meet what the industry needs and what the organizations I'm in.
Yeah, so you did spend some time as a biologist, so it's not that you learned it and ran away immediately. So a number of years, I think it was 8 years, 10 years. So you definitely found something that you were good at and that you found interest in. Otherwise, you wouldn't have stayed in there for this long, correct? So what was
No, that's absolutely right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think I found I've been very fortunate in a lot of my career for multiple reasons. And one of the best examples of that is when I went into the lab, I was, what we used to jokingly refer to as a gene jockey.
Okay.
I did all kinds of cell expression work. So I spent hours and hours a day in what's called a biological safety cabinet, which is effectively a fume hood. So it sort of runs air usually from top to bottom, if I remember right. And it just sort of creates this environment where the area that you're working in is sterile. And I used to, that was my lab partner, was this, this large fume hood basically. And I got really, really lucky because one of the first jobs that I had out of my undergrad, was as part of the team that developed the production cell line for one of the largest selling large molecule interventions of the past 50 years. And I had no idea what it meant. I was young and dumb. I had no idea what it meant to make a cell line that made a 10 to 15 billion dollar a year drug. I just thought it was really cool. I could get these heterodimeric molecules to express in my CHO cells and actually get the titers high enough to be able to present to the team. That was a really, sort of, I didn't realize how lucky I was to have that happen. And that was a lot of what, I'd love to say I'd love to say that I was great, but I was lucky. And I think that there's, sometimes people who are lucky say that they're great because it feels better. But I was lucky. I was really lucky.
The thing I always say when someone says something like this, I always say the great philosopher Angelina Jolie, I think it was her, she said, success is 90% preparation and 10% luck. I love that quote. So yeah, you were lucky, but I guess there was a lot of groundwork and technical understanding that had to be brought into to be lucky in the end.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's another saying, luck favors the well prepared.
Here we go. Yeah.
And as much as I want it,
I
again,
think Brad Pitt said
I'd
that.
love to say I was well prepared. At the same time, I'm like, yeah, I think I was lucky.
Yeah, no, that's it. Matteo, just because I grew up in the pharmaceutical industry as well, I was in HR, so I can follow what you're saying. But just for those who are not in the pharmaceutical industry, just one detail because that's interesting. Large molecule intervention that goes to 10, $15 billion. In layman's terms, that means I assume that's an antibody in the cancer a treatment space, or what are we talking about? So that people feel like, what
Yeah.
does it mean?
Yeah. So when you look at, depending on how far back you want me to go, when you look at interventions, sort of pills or injectables in bottles,
Yes.
they're usually one of two things: they're large molecule or small molecule. There's
Yes.
there's
Chemistry,
other
biology.
therapies like, yeah, there's certainly there's like CAR T technologies, which are
Yes.
basically re-engineering one's own cells to provide therapeutic benefit. But most of the interventions out there are large molecule or small molecule. Small molecules are the classic pills and bottles.
It's your
So
headache pill and anything.
yeah, exactly.
It's chemistry.
Exactly. And that's usually how they're made. They're usually
Yes.
made through chemical processes. So typically you find, you have your antigen or whatever you want your intervention to react with. You define its binding pocket. So you make sure that what you create will actually bind into that
Yep.
pocket. You'll either agonize or antagonize it. So those are classic small molecule, strategies. Large molecules, on the other hand, typically antibodies, which are, we all make actually everything makes antibodies to ward off, intruders effectively. And they're oftentimes they're humanized. So oftentimes they're human antibodies that have been engineered to have greater efficacy, greater binding, longer half-life, that kind of stuff. So what I was involved in was that. So actually creating a large molecule intervention. So if you think about an antibody, it's typically two chains. So you have a heavy chain, which sort of usually is diagrammed like this and then like that. And then you have two light chains that sort of stick on the outside of that. So if you think about it, it kind of looks like the letter Y with
Okay.
the arms of the Y sort of being attached to it.
Nice.
And yeah, I thought about that one for a while.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's an amazing way to present it. Very cool.
But what I was responsible for was creating a cell line. So typically you're using mammalian cells, so non-human mammal cells. The ones that are frequently used, or at least were frequently used when I was in the lab, were CHO cells, which are Chinese hamster ovary cells. And they're immortalized, so they'll sort of keep on growing as long as you can culture them. And the goal was to get DNA that encoded for these antibodies into that cell, and then have that be expressed. The target for this actually wasn't oncology. And that's interesting because a lot of large molecule treatments back then and even today are largely focused on oncology for a variety of reasons.
Yes.
And one of the big moves right now is what's called immuno-oncology. So
Yes.
combining these large molecule treatments, oftentimes with small molecule treatments, to target the sort of mosaic of different cell types in a tumor. But this was actually going after a very different kind of target that was in the autoimmune space. So this
Oh,
was really looking at, and this was kind of novel for the, that wasn't kind of novel. This was novel for
it
the
was
company.
novel at the time. Yes.
Yeah, this wasn't something that,
Hmm.
this wasn't something that people were really focused on here, but it found, it definitely found its target. Still, um, it's still doing quite well. And again, it was it was kind of at the forefront of this not this tech so much, but sort of the commercialization of these kinds of molecules. So that was a large part of what I was focused on. And I'll be honest with you, I wish I would have known at the time how much fun I was having, because I had a lot of fun too.
So all that scientific power, and then if we just go chronologically, alongside your CV, then there's this one morning. No, there's this one. Did you all of a sudden you're a salesperson? Did you get up? Did you get up one morning and tell yourself, "I'm not a scientist anymore"? What happened there?
Great question. The short answer is when I made the decision to formally, quote unquote, leave the lab, I
Yes.
still saw myself as a scientist. And I remember one of the first sales managers I worked for originally didn't want to hire me because his comment was, when I asked you, who are you? You said you're still a scientist.
Yep.
And no, you need to tell yourself you're a salesperson.
I'm a salesperson. I'm a salesperson. I'm a
Yeah,
salesperson.
exactly. But, at the same time, I was sort of navigating this transition because, the way that I defined myself at the time was as a scientist. That's what I did.
Of
That's
course, it's been
that's
10 years almost. It's been
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's probably been the longest time that I've done any one thing.
Yes.
So I went from sales into field application sciences. So effectively helping scientists understand how to use the instrumentation that the company I worked for made, and how to use both the instrumentation and the software to analyze the results from that. And that for me was a really interesting time because it was literally, get on the plane Monday morning, go to 4 or 5 different places over the course of the week, get home Friday night, figure out where to get your laundry done on the weekend, and rinse and repeat kind of thing. So I did that for about a year and a half. And then I got offered the opportunity to, I'll never forget the conversation because the person that I ended up working for said, how'd you like to sell? And I thought,
Yeah.
and he said, well, look, I got this great opportunity for you. It's definitely an opportunity to take over a territory that, had been underperforming, but should be overperforming. Oh, by the way, it's 3,000 miles away from where you live and where you've lived
Sheesh.
most of your life. And you should take this. And I won't get into all the reasons why, but at the time it sort of made a lot of sense. So, I got on the plane, I flew out to San Diego. Um, I flew into Orange County, and I went down to my then boss's house, picked up my car, which was one of those dustbuster vans, which was,
Mhm. Yep.
when you're a single guy and you're moved to Southern California, that's what you want. You want a dustbuster van. That's the stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's like basically he hands me the keys to the dustbuster. And then he says, oh, by the way, I'm leaving this gig. I'm going to take over management of the key accounts group. And I had never sold, right? So I was going into a territory that I didn't know, with, clients I didn't know. And I'd never really spent time in Southern California, so I didn't know it, driving a dustbuster. But that's how I
Yeah.
started. That's how I
So, yeah.
started in sales. And it was a great opportunity because, I sort of went into this giant blue water environment. It's like, oh, all the water's blue. There's no red in the water. It's great. Sorry, that's a sales term. You talk about blue
It's
water,
yes.
red water, right? So, but, I sort of became the unconscious competent then because I didn't know why I was successful, but I was crazy successful. I mean, my first year selling, I did something like 180% of my quota. I was the company's worldwide sales rep of the year. I sold more in that territory than some country reps sold. So like I think I sold more than the rep that covered all of France that year, right? So
Wow.
was like, well, that's cool. I'd rather do it in France, but still, it's cool. It
Southern California with a sexy car is not too bad.
wasn't just sexy. It was,
Yeah, was it
uh,
Chevy Astro or what was it?
it was the Chevy Lumina.
Oh, here we go.
Um, and yeah, this
I
is
guess all the surfer girls, they loved it.
and the best part is I can't swim, right? So it's
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
I got a car to take surfboards in, and I can't even swim, right? So, but it was such an amazing experience because I was very successful at it. I was really rough. You know, I definitely my edges weren't smoothed out. I definitely had rough edges. But
Oh,
I
that's
would
the scientist in you because scientists talk clarity and data. But it can be rough because numbers can be tough.
yeah, and also navigating people's expectations, right? When it's sort of like, well, this experiment should work because of this, this, and this, and you're like, sorry, the data's telling you something
Yes.
really different. That's a hard conversation to have, but it's a necessary conversation to have. Like I said, that was my sort of first entry into sales. The sort of wild success, the lack of clarity on why I was successful, that I realized a lot of this was, for me, something that's been a big chunk of who I am and what I've done really ever since forever, which is just sort of getting up and doing it. You know, when people ask me, why were you successful? And it's like, yeah, I don't know, there's a musician and a poet, a guy named Henry Rollins that I'm a fan of. And they asked him once, how he was successful. And he said, I might not be that talented, but I get up and I do it every day. And that still sticks with me, right? It's like sort of probably not the smartest. I know I'm not the smartest. I'm not the most skilled at X, Y, or Z, but I'm going to get up and I'm going to do it every day. And then as I started doing this more and more, and I started getting a deeper understanding of the industry itself, I started to really focus on, how can we do things that bring value to the industry, that enable the industry to do things, more quickly, more confidently, and with better understanding of the data that they're working with. And that's really driven me ever since the early to mid 90s, when I went into sales and had that sort of crazy success out on the West Coast. It was just, how do we actually engage with the scientific community to do a better job here, and be able to be a resource for them. And that's been a big chunk of what's driven me as well. Is, my goal here isn't necessarily to sell X or sell Y or to sell Z. It's to actually work with my clients to present solutions that have value for them. You
Uh, uh, Interesting question for you. So we work with the psychometric tool. There's millions on the market. We work with something that's called HBDI.
Mhm.
It
All right.
is the right brain and the left brain. Typically, right brain people, and by the way, these are the colors, but not in the right order. Right brain people tell stories and make connections. And often, when I work with marketers, amazing or funny enough, 10 people walk in the room and 10 of those people are right brain people as per the tool in this yellow red. And I worked in pharmaceutical development, or when I work in, let's a little bit deeper in the science, especially the labs, people come in left brain, like data, facts, structure, order, process. Now, the question is, what are you? Because you've survived a good amount of time in the left brain world, and then apparently you thrived in the right brain world.
Yeah.
So, and this is the leap to today. Let's make a 30-year leap. When you look at the parts of your brain that you're using today and what you do, and we'll get to what you do today. Is it the data? Is it the structures that you build, the deals? Is it the stories that you tell? Is it the connections, what you make? So what's the combination of those four elements where you say that's today's mix? Because apparently you have both sides in a way that you're being able to be a scientist, but also be a salesperson. So question is, who are you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I ask myself that all the
Yeah, we
time.
do. Yeah,
I don't always have the answer.
it's a
Um,
journey. It's fine.
yeah.
Give us what is it today? It's November 13. No,
Yeah.
I'm joking.
You the reason I'm sort of smiling and sort of looking off to the side is I ask myself this all the time, right? Because it's sort of, again, I got asked, are you a scientist? I thought when I got asked that
Yes,
question, I
yes.
was like, yes, I'm a scientist. And I realized over time that the parts of what I was doing that I really enjoyed the most was less about the data and more about the story that the data told. And that for me has again been a big part of
Ah,
what
yes.
drives me. It's sort of, again, if you do this right, or what I think of as right, the data that you're generating, the sort of knowledge that comes out of that should be able to weave a story. And a lot of folks that I've engaged with are fantastic at generating the data. They're not necessarily fantastic at developing or weaving the story.
Is it one of the main reasons, for example, pharmaceutical development projects failed? It's because we have different ideas about what story the data tells us?
So one of the things that I found from work that I've done, particularly in the mechanistic modeling space, is that everybody has their own story. Everybody has their
Yes.
own vision. The problem is that there's more data available than you can typically use to create those models, right? So everybody's got their own vision of things. And a lot of times you find that even if a project has moved very far forward, a lot of times if you talk to different parts of the organization, they've got very different stories about what the intervention is, what it does, and what to be concerned about. And part of it is, excuse me, that old Japanese saying that, to a hammer, everything's a nail. So everybody looks at it through the filter of their training, right? Because you've got folks
Yes,
who are incredibly intelligent, incredibly well versed,
agreed.
and very specific in the knowledge that they're bringing to this discussion. So, your question was is part of the challenge that everybody has a different story on the data
Based on where they come from.
based on where they come from. It's that plus a lot of times they're looking at different parts of the data set because that's where their training sort of directs them to go.
Yes. And I mean, and we have unique angles. I think this is part of how it is. So you're, if I might summarize, you're the molecular biologist turned sales prodigy in a dustbuster van. Um,
I've been called worse than that, but
no,
yeah,
no, I'm just no, no. This is just data, man. I'm just as you recognize, it was just summarizing. The story happens in our heads.
yeah, it really
But
does.
what I wanted to say is, this is your unique perspective on whatever you're looking at. The unique perspective is I've learned the stuff from the beginning. I know from the ground up. I do understand molecular biology, but I found a liking and success in selling it, in bringing it to the people and making the connections and telling the story. Is this what you do today? Does this fall into the same realm that you combine the scientific understanding, but scientific understanding as such, as I understand from you, is something you evolved past that. It is listening to you, you're a scientist. I can definitely say that, but there's got to be more than just the science, correct?
First of all, yes,
Yes.
you very much hit it on the head, and I think that when one of the challenges that exists in the industry is that the folks that are making decisions on programs and on projects oftentimes are folks that are much more educated than I am. So, folks with
Yeah, people have crazy education. I agree.
crazy education who have
Yes, yes.
also, again, for lack of a better way to say it, have sort of evolved past the science itself. I realize a lot of the conversations are in and around imagine if, and that isn't just about the data. That's about the data's taken us this far. Let's
Mhm.
let's have some thought on what that next step looks like. And then what does the next step mean? Because if what you're doing is just sort of generating data, you're not necessarily accomplishing the full value that you bring to the table. And the example that I always talk about is in the pharma world, when you're developing a product, something, pill or injectable to go in a bottle, you're looking at the data, and the one thing you don't want to see are outliers because those outliers are going to create you problems in manufacturing and quality, in tox, all that kind of stuff. When you're an academic, you want to see the outliers, right? Because the
You need to.
outliers could tell
Yes.
you something really interesting. You might be able to get grant. You might be able to get a grant to do. So, you're both scientists, but you're looking at this in a very different way. And I find the whole conversation of the story to be so much more interesting and so much more valuable than just the data. Because the data, you can't have the story without the data, but the story isn't just the data.
Yes, whatever product you're developing can be in pharma or anywhere. When you get to a 65% level, salespeople will probably say, I can sell that.
Yeah.
65 is plenty,
Yeah.
70 is plenty.
Yeah.
When you have trained scientists in the pharmaceutical space, I don't even think 99% is plenty. And this
Yeah.
is
65% sure isn't.
no, and there's the FDA who has to, has to say the one or the other word too. But the question, in terms of your training, I feel like, and this is a hypothesis, more like something I think about. You're someone who tries to find the sweet spot where we do say we have the science correct, and now we can go to market. Because if we go from here further into the science, we're subject to diminishing returns of the work that we put in, because it is not just good enough, it's good. And that might, in some cases, be 85%. But someone needs to make this call to say, this is ready.
Yeah, it's enough. Yeah, exactly. I think that that's one of the things that I've had so many conversations throughout my career on are, at what point does directional correctness equal correct?
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's a lot of, modeling's a great example. So mechanistic modeling, can't remember who said it, but somebody said like the quote is something like all models are wrong, but some models are useful. So,
It sounds
models
like George Orwell, but that might be something.
does sound like Orwell, doesn't it?
It
Yeah.
does sound like
It does
Orwell.
sound really
Everybody's the
Orwellian. Yeah,
same. Just
yeah, exactly. All animals are equal, just some are
yeah.
more equal than others. But I think that when you look at mechanistic modeling gives you directional correctness. It says, put your resources here rather than there, because this is important to understand. This might not be so important.
So for the listener, mechanistic modeling means in a computer you model how a drug would work, as opposed. So that's just as an explanation, because I think you
Yeah.
and I understand what it is, but some people saw.
Yeah. So when I think about mechanistic modeling, the spaces that I've been in have effectively been involving the creation of, for lack of a better way to say it, a virtual patient. So
Yes.
when you hear a lot of the terms these days around virtual patients, digital twins,
Yes.
those are basically using data to create a computer simulation of human biology and or disease pathophysiology that is complete enough to provide you with an understanding of what interventions to impact the human condition, what they will do.
Mm.
So, in one of the, a lot of times this sort of fits into the conversation as well, but it all comes back to, okay, is 65% understanding enough? Or is that 35% that you don't understand? Is that really where either the magic or the danger happens? And, a lot of what I've been focused on throughout my career is trying to make that decision between how much is good enough, how much delta
Yes.
between directionally correct and full understanding of correctness. Where does that trip hammer happen?
So it's not so you took the Pareto principle and made it the Marano principle.
Yeah, well, sure. I don't know if I want a principle associated with my name because that,
Yeah. Oh, I
yeah,
mean, is a kind of that's creating a legacy. That is fame. Um, here's
take
an
name over infamy any day. Sure.
yeah. So from this moment on, it'll be the Marano principle for me. Definitely 80-20. You never heard of the Marano principle, but Matteo, here's a question. So listening to you, there's a ton of science, and don't get me wrong, it is, of course, for the average person, it'll be hard to follow, like, what's he talking about? But the way you present it is the way of a salesperson. So you present it in a lively, even if I don't understand everything, it feels good to listen to you. So apparently and let me go back to these both sides of the brain. How exactly and where because I think this is where you create value for maybe for yourself and for others. How does this work? Because it seems like you're balancing both at the same time, and you found your sweet spot. Tell me a little bit more about that sweet spot between strategy, impact, where you really found a home and create value.
Yeah, and I think the short answer to your question is, real scientists look at me and go, "No,
It-
you're not a
I see.
scientist."
I couldn't tell. I thought it sounded amazing, but yeah.
Well, I remember when I was working in the lab, the vice president of research for the group, she later became the president of a major pharmaceutical company. Brilliant, brilliant woman, and she sat us all down and said, "Well, the way you know you're a scientist is if you pass the shower test." And I thought to myself, I'm not really sure where this is going, but it's either going to be fascinating or it's going to be wholly
This,
inappropriate. Um, and the shower test to her was, and I always thought it was, well, did you take a shower? Okay, that's one way. But her concept was, if you didn't think about the research that you were going to do that day while you were taking your shower, you probably shouldn't be a scientist. I realized at that point in time, I was probably doing that 2 or 3 days out of every 5, and I recognized that the folks that were gonna be scientists for their career, many of whom I still talk to, and they're still that's what they do every day. They're thinking about their experiments. And I think that sort of, to me, that says you're a scientist, right? If you're thinking about what
yes.
you wanna do that day, you're a scientist.
So, what do
So
you think about what you want to do every day?
first of all, I think about things like, how do I communicate this?
Yeah.
And to whom do I want to communicate this?
Yes.
Who's the right person to say this to? And who, even if the message is right, is the messenger delivering it to the wrong person? So a lot of this for me is around, to sort of circle back to what we were talking about earlier, is around the story.
Yes.
And when you ask me who I am, I I, I think of myself in a strange way as a storyteller, because the way that I'm sort of developing strategies for the organizations I work for is sort of building something from what we do that has very real value to our clients, but hasn't yet been communicated to them.
Yes.
So
Agreed.
it's not just about, look, we bring to the table X, Y, and Z. The real answer is, well, why do you care? And that's a
Hmm.
big chunk of what I've really been focused on is, why do you care? Why does any of this have any value for you?
Yeah.
Because there's certainly, in the life sciences space, there's a lot of technology out there that's me too, right? You can sort of, why do you care? Well, because it's cheaper than the other stuff. Okay, nothing wrong with that. For me, what gets me out of bed is, if you could do this, if you had the ability to do this, what would it look like and what would you do? And that's a lot of what I sort of asked myself when I was involved in the modeling space. It was sort of, if you could get a better understanding of what your intervention would do in a human in a human being involving human biology, before you put it into folks in a clinical trial, what would you do with that? What would it mean for the way that you do things? What would happen if you get a better understanding of the actual human disease earlier on, so that you can focus your research on applications, potential interventions, potential targets that are going to be impactful earlier on, so that you can get perhaps the ability to shorten the time from discovery to regulatory approval. Even if you do it by 6 months, that's a major, major accomplishment. And the way that you're going to do that is through better understanding of the human biology, of the disease pathophysiology, and the parameters by which and under which your intervention will be efficacious for a specific person.
Amazing. And I have two more questions. What is the best story told at the moment in the pharmaceutical industry regarding? Yeah, and I'm thinking I've been brewing on this. So, listening, and I'm
All
like,
right.
what's the best story at the moment? I mean, of course, 5 years ago was mRNA. It was definitely there was an amazing, story wise. If we just look at stories, amazing. It's been there for 40 years. No one really touched it. Then they took it out and created the vaccine. So at the moment, I think the action in pharma, if and please correct me if I'm wrong, is still in oncology and cancer treatment. And we're hearing you mentioned the immunology, there's CRISPR out there. So what's the greatest story at the moment from your perspective? Because that's where the money is, right? That's what I understood.
I remember when there's a great quote from Willie Sutton, the old bank robber. They asked him why he robbed banks. He said, "Well, it's because that's where the money is."
Yes,
But
yes.
when you look at when you look at where the top VC firms are investing, and I had a great conversation with one of the partners in a VC group just this morning, actually. And I was asking the question of sort of what's the next frontier. And still there's a big investment in oncology. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of it has to do with, well, first of all, oncology related issues are deadly in our society. It's a major,
It
um,
is.
it's a major killer. It's sort of that and metabolic disease, particularly diabetes, and now I think we're seeing a lot of things like CNS issues, like Alzheimer's, are really becoming,
Yes.
as we grow older, they certainly become
Yeah.
more and more obvious. I think that you're still seeing a lot of investment in oncology. I think that right now, today, the thing that's really interesting for a lot of investment groups is autoimmune.
Mhm.
I don't know I don't know where that's gonna go, because there already seems to be some, "Okay, where do we put money here and why?" I think that the biggest play or the future is gonna be in and around greater understanding of central nervous system disorders, particularly things like Parkinson's, MS, and specifically Alzheimer's and age-related dementia. But I think the greatest story being told right now, the ones that
Mhm.
I really think are fantastic, are when you look at the ability that we have right now to use certain technologies to cure diseases that we couldn't cure before. Sickle cell anemia is a great example. The way that that's being done is utilizing some of the novel uses of current technology. Well, there are technologies out there right now, and they're insanely expensive, right? It's sort of the tech that's involved in curing folks with sickle cell anemia. It's multi-million dollars, but it exists.
For treatment, that's what I'm saying. It's
Treatment
per person. Yeah.
per person, but it
Yeah.
exists. And if you think about, fortunately or unfortunately, when you think about these interventions being given, a lot of the decisions get made around, well, how young is this person? How many years of this debilitation are they going to have to deal with? And what's the cost associated with that? It's a horrible cost benefit discussion, and it doesn't always feel great. But the solutions are there, right? The tech's going to be there or the tech's going to evolve to make this more cost effective. That's, those are
That's a
the
big
kinds of
story.
things.
That's
Those are the
yes.
kinds of things that get me really excited when
Yeah.
I think about how you can change a person's life. You can change their life trajectory. You can change you can change the length of their life, right? It's sort of, and you think about things like, cystic fibrosis, right? That was folks didn't live to be older than
Yes.
21 or 22. I mean, folks right now are living well into their 50s with this and leading relatively normal lives. Those kinds of things are what I find really, really exciting. And the advent of new technologies, certainly CRISPR-Cas is a great example of this, are really going to enable more of this.
Matteo, wrapping up actually with a double question. Number one, no, part one, 1A. I'm impressed how you pivoted in your career you know, from the lab into sales and finding the best blend between both. A lot of people would like to pivot in some form or another. And you said something very right at the beginning. It is very hard to determine at age 16 who you're gonna be. So that is what is the biggest lesson or the recommendation you have for everyone out there in terms of pivoting and based on your story? And secondly, of course, that's question 1B is, did you arrive where you wanted to be, or what's the next leg of your journey?
Yeah. So, first of all, fantastic questions. My recommendation to anybody, my recommendation, my recommendation to my younger self. How about if I say it that way?
Oh, yes.
I would have told myself something that one of my very, very real friends told his son, which is, take a course in an area that you're interested in. So if you want to be a scientist, your first year, take a hardcore bio class, or worse, if you're an absolute masochist, take a hardcore physics class. Take a class in something that you don't like,
Oh,
and then take a class in something that just doesn't. You're like, wow, that sounds really crazy. I'd like to take that class. Because I think that a lot of what I experienced was when I went into my undergrad and I knew I first wanted to be a doctor. And then I realized that cookie stuff comes out of sick people. And I wasn't, I was like, I don't want to. What I realized was what got me really excited wasn't what I thought I was going to be excited going into this. I was much more interested in molecular biology than I was, for example, in biophysics or in microbiology. So I would suggest, take a don't be afraid to do something that you don't like. And don't be afraid to learn about something that you might not like from somebody who loves it. That's a great place to start.
that's a great I love the recommendation. I've never heard it like this, but it's amazing. Yes.
And I think if I had done that, I certainly, I don't know that I would have made better choices, as I don't think I made horribly bad choices, but I probably would have understood the choices that I made rather than looking at them retrospectively. So, I mean, that's one thing. Am I where I want to be? I think if I said that, there's a part of me that wants to, at my age, say yes to that. And there's a part of me that also says, no, I'm not exactly where I want to be, for two reasons. One, I always want to make an impact.
Yes.
And I don't know that this is the impact that I'm making right now is the impact I want to make. I might want to do something more. I might get a better understanding of something that I really, really focus on. So I'm always interested in understanding and learning more. And that sort of tells me that I don't know that I'm exactly where I want to be, but
Yeah.
I think where I am, I feel good about where I am. And I feel proud in some ways, although, pride's not a virtue, it's a vice. I do feel somewhat proud about that. But I do think, number one, learn about something that you don't think you give a darn about from somebody who loves it. Always question where you're at. Never be afraid. Never be sort of pushed into a corner where you feel like you can't ask questions. Um, and the other thing I would say is find yourself mentors. Find the folks to talk to that can help you understand the process. Because for me, if I had had some of the mentors that I had at 50 and when I was 20, yeah, I would have liked that. So,
Yes. Matteo, that was a big question. Hey, let me wrap this up real quick. Mm. Matteo's journey shows that impact in life sciences isn't just about developing new technologies, it's about connecting them to people, purpose, and a long term impact. We talked a lot about impact. His path from scientist to sales professional to strategic leader shows how influence grows when you carry ideas beyond the lab and into the decisions that move the field forward. Matteo also reminds us that strong careers come from curiosity, clarity, and knowing when to pivot or redefine success. I think you're a prime example for that. And at the heart of your story is the balance between, the analytical and the human part, or the left side and the right side of the brain, being true to yourself, letting your identity evolve with your work, and using both sides of the brain, and maybe a little bit of humor to stay grounded. So for anyone navigating change, I think, Matteo, your path is an amazing reminder that understanding who you are can guide you where you go. And most importantly, and I learned this today, everybody's got to find their own Marano principle.
I just want to be clear. My royalty's 4% on that. So.
Yeah, very nice, Matteo. It was wonderful having you on the show. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful conversation.